approving that. So again, welcome. My name's Katie. I'm work in the Career Enrichment Network. We're joined tonight for our alumni law student panel. We're going to begin by introducing each one of our panelists. Tonight, we have James Smith. He's graduated from Penn State University in 2019 with a Bachelor of Arts in International Politics and a minor in Spanish. James is currently a 3L at Temple University, Beasley School of Law, where he serves as a managing editor of Temple Law Review, Volume 94, and a judicial extern in the U.S. District Court of Eastern Pennsylvania. James will be joining the tax controversy practice of a large law firm in San Francisco starting in the fall of 2022. Congratulations, James, on that placement. We also have Genevievre Miller. Genevievre is a second-year law student at Northeastern University School of Law. She graduated from Penn State in May 2020, earning degrees in political science and African studies with minors in African American studies and women's studies. She is currently interning with the Harvard Immigration and Refugee Clinic. At Northeastern, she is president of the Black Law Students Association, as an associate editor on the Northeastern Law Review, and a member of New Court. We have Daniel Zahn. He is a second-year student at Stanford Law School. In spring 2020, he graduated from Penn State with BAs in English, Philosophy, and Communications Arts and Sciences. At Penn State, Daniel was involved with the Mock Trial Association, University Park Undergraduate Association, Paterno Fellows, Schreyer Honors College, and the Presidential Leadership Academy. In law school, he is focused on First Amendment and election rights litigation, and he is on the Stanford Law Review and is on the Stanford Journal of Civil Rights and Liberties, and serves as the co-president of the Election Law Project and Jewish Law Students Association. Alannah King is a graduate from Penn State in 2020 with her Bachelor of Science in Criminology and a Bachelor of Arts in Political Science. Alannah then continued her education at Penn State School of Public Policy and earned her Master in Public Policy in 2021. She is now a JD candidate at Villanova University Charles Whitger School of Law, where she is studying as a public service scholar. And our last finalist is Peyton Woodward. She is a second-year law student here at Penn State Law. She graduated from Penn State in May 2020 with a bachelor's degree in economics and a minor in history. This past summer, she interned with Justice Suzanne Adams of the New York Supreme Court Civil Branch. At Penn State Law, Peyton is an associate editor of the Arbitration Law Review, a student representative for LexisNexis, a student admissions counselor, and a member of Penn State Law benefiting Zahn, the Corporate Law Society, and Phi Delta Phi Legal Honor Society. You all are very busy, even in law school. So thank you all for joining us. To the students, I said to our panelists, I would kick us off with the first question, but again, please feel free to add those questions to the Q&A. First one being, what is law school really like and how is it differing from undergraduate? So I will invite Alannah to begin because she's the L1 of our group and is actually not fresh out of undergrad. You were at the MPP program. So I'll start with you.
Yeah, one thing that I would say is very different is you have to get very good at scheduling out your time efficiently because the readings do take a lot longer than undergrad and they are more intensive as opposed to being able to skim them and kind of passively absorb information. You really have to actively interact with them. So you have to get very good at portioning out your time correctly and really managing it to make sure that you're being effective with how you're spending your time studying.
Thank you. Someone else? Start with you, Daniel.
Yeah, I think I noticed that a lot of the learning really happens inside the classroom in a way that wasn't necessarily true for me for undergrad. In undergrad, I sought out all these out of the classroom learning experiences like lunches and stuff. And didn't read everything I was supposed to, and had a more holistic educational experience. And I think even though you're still able to do that, I still go to lunches and dinners and stuff like that. The bulk of it is really read these cases, show up to class and understand the cases. And it's really hard to just like not do the reading. So everyone's going to tell you it's a lot of reading, and it is a lot of reading, but also being a lawyer is often a lot of reading. So it's good preparation, or so I'm told.
It's a good point. It doesn't stop in law school, right? Anyone else want to add to it? If not, we just got a question in the chat. All right, jump into that. What are your thoughts on taking a gap year after going to law school, before going to law school? Anyone have a thought or do so?
I'll touch on this.
Sure.
Yeah, I think a gap year is very wise, particularly if you feel that you're unsure about law school or that you are someone who wants to get more real world experience outside of just education experience, for example. Because I did not take a gap year, and that's something that, looking back on, I've enjoyed my law school experience, but my classmates and peers who have taken gap years just come to the law school with just a little more maturity in terms of what to expect, and also how to really put in hours that are 9 to 5, and it's more of like a easier transition for them. I believe we lost. Oh, Katie's back. Okay. But again, that's just my opinion, and I'm happy to hear others' takes on that as well.
Yeah, I'm happy to speak on that as well. I think depending on what kind of student you are, it could be a really good idea, especially if you're kind of feeling a little burnt out from your current program. Your 1L year is definitely not something you can do if you're already exhausted and kind of fed up with learning. So if you are feeling that way and you're feeling a little disenchanted with school, I would definitely recommend taking a gap year, but also make it meaningful. Like, make sure that you're doing something so it's not just a complete gap on your resume. You still have like meaningful experience that could contribute to your law school application if you do decide to go.
I'll quickly jump in. Sorry. Obviously, I didn't take a gap year. I think you should really think if there's something you want to do or try out before going to law school that you can do in just a year, absolutely do that. Law school will always be there, and you don't necessarily need to jump right in. The average age is at a lot of law schools now is climbing up to around like 24, 25. But I didn't take a gap year because the jobs I wanted to do required JD. So I didn't really want to put that off. And I'll also say, if you do take a gap year, if you plan on getting academic recommendations, which a lot of law schools prefer, you should get them your senior year of college, because they will stay in the system for, I think, 5 years, and you want to get them when you know the professor the best. You don't want them having to think back a year later being like, okay, this student had this good project that I thought was great a year ago, let me try and remember it when you can get it. Exactly. And also, don't be afraid to apply and then defer. There's someone in my year who deferred for 4 years because he was just like gallivanting around South America. And so if you're like worried about the gap year and stuff like that, you can always usually defer at least 1 year.
Yeah, I think I guess your decision has to be based on if you're tired or not. 1L is really, really hard. And so you want to be as well rested as possible. And so if you feel that you can do that right when you graduate, that's great, do it. But if you need some time, I would recommend taking the gap year.
Great, thank you. Great ideas to share on the gap year idea. Nicole, I see you have your hand raised. And before I say that, if I disappear again, somebody take over. So, oh, okay, no longer. All right, I don't think so. So it looks like the questions are moving towards the application process. So can you look back on your application process as an undergrad at Penn State and share maybe something that you wish you did differently, some resources at Penn State, and what let's start with those two. Look back on your application process. What was that like for you, and what did you do? Were there resources at Penn State that helped you? Peyton, do you want to start with that one?
Sure. So I'll say overall, for my application process, I wish I had started it earlier, because sort of connecting back to our last question about gap year, like I was in that sort of decision period of, am I going to take some time? Am I going to go straight through? Going straight through is best for me because I need structure in school. I got out, I wasn't coming back. So I wish I had started earlier. And especially like as a senior in college, you have so many other things you're doing, classes, involvement, hanging out with your friends. So like do it bit by bit so it doesn't seem like such a gargantuan task. You know, take your LSAT, get those recommendations, start working on personal statements, start figuring out when the deadlines are, apply early. So I would just say my overall thing was start earlier, because I sort of left it all towards the end. And so I was spending a lot of weekends in the library doing my applications. And then also just about the whole process in general, like really focus on what matters to you most in a school where you're going to be happy for another 3 years in an academic realm. You know, is it where you are currently? Is it halfway across the country or the world? Is it in a specific city? Is it small? Is it large? Like really focus on what environment is most conducive to your success. And that I think will drive the most important part of the process.
Thank you. Alannah?
But yeah, sorry. Another really great resource, I totally agree with everything Peyton said, by the way, but Kathy Guerin, she is the pre-law advisor. She's amazing. Highly, cannot say enough good things about her. Highly recommend. Also, I would say in the same vein as Peyton, like really get your applications in early. My cycle of applications was incredibly intense. There were a lot of us. It was very competitive. So really getting your applications in early, because it is a rolling process, meaning they review them as they come in. The earlier you can get it in, the more likely you are to get accepted and also be considered for much larger scholarship offers if that's important to you, because they have more funds at the beginning, obviously, than they do at the end of their cycle.
Something that I wish I did differently was not apply to as many schools as I did. Something you may not know is that even if you get an application waiver, you still have to pay the $40 report fee for every school that you apply to. So just because you perceive it as a free, you just put your name in, you still have to pay $40. And I think I lacked a lot of self-confidence during the process, where I just like put my name everywhere and like hope something stick. And some schools that rejected me, I probably would have never gone to anyway. So definitely be smart on like which schools that you choose to apply to. And if you don't get into them, you don't get into them, but like don't just apply to somewhere and then you might not even go there. But on the other hand, I would also recommend shooting your shot in some schools. And even if you're not in the median range, I would still encourage you to consider applying. I'm going to a school where I was not in the median range, and I'm not saying that it's like foolproof, but if there's somewhere that you really want to go to, I would consider like putting your hat in the ring, because what else can happen? But just not every ring. Be wise. Yes.
I definitely agree with a lot of the advice, and some of the ways to actually implement it is like by applying early, because it's rolling, as Alannah said, you're going to hear back earlier. So maybe you got into a school, so you're not going to apply to these other schools that maybe you would have regardless. And that means like shifting your entire process earlier of like asking for letters of recommendation early, because professors have a lot on their plate. And like, even if you give them 3 months, you're going to have like 4 follow-ups to be like, hey, I actually want to apply to a school tomorrow. Can you upload the letter? So really making sure you're being forthright with your communication. And then also, I think what's different than undergrad is that there's the 2 like hard statistics of GPA and LSAT, which I think matter more for law schools than your SAT, ACT, and high school GPA did. Again, that's not dispositive. People are at schools where they're higher or lower than the median. But in part of being able to shrink your list and not spend as much money and not spend as much time is having a few reach schools and then a few target schools and a few safety schools, and really using your GPA and LSAT to kind of align those.
Great point. And that was one of the questions that just came in, Daniel, was are law schools reviewing applications the same or in a similar way as colleges review potential undergrad applications? So you mentioned that the LSAT and the GPA are their top two pieces that law schools are looking at. What does anyone have any advice when it comes to resume or the letters of rec personal statement as well as part of that application? And I will agree that Kathy Guerin, who was potentially going to join us tonight, I don't know if she's on the call or not, but absolutely, I tell all students I meet with, and I put the link in the chat for everyone to the pre-law website. So I would suggest joining the listserv. So with that said, what about those additional pieces of the application for law school?
I would say that if your GPA or your LSAT is not where you would like it to be, then your personal statement and your diversity statement need to be very, very strong. And so I would spend a lot of time on that, particularly if you're a person of color or part of LGBT, like something like that. I would highly, highly, highly recommend that you do the diversity statement. It's very, 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 very important. And I think it definitely helps you if you're not where you want to be with your numbers. So I would spend a lot of time on that, and I would start that as you're studying for the LSAT. So for my schedule and my studying routine, I would do 5 hours of LSAT, but then I would spend the same amount of time on my statements because they're just as important. And they also make up for things that you lack in other areas. So I would recommend spending a lot of time on those.
I would also like to echo that because personally, I didn't have a very strong LSAT score at all. So I really focused on highlighting other things I could offer in the application process. So my resume had all of my involvement on it. I really focused on what I did in undergrad and what I can bring to the law school table from those experiences. And then your personal statement is really the one place, and I feel I remember Kathy saying this, where they're going to get to know you as a person on paper, not just a number. So really write something that's, you're very passionate about, that's meaningful to you, that really brings you across as an applicant and as a person behind those numbers, and really focus on those as a holistic picture. Because yeah, numbers do matter, but there are other things that can also supplement if you aren't in the range you want to be.
And I think the holistic picture is the biggest difference I perceive in undergrad versus law school admissions. I obviously have never worked as an admissions counselor in either, and I don't really know how they review them. But it's my impression that especially for law school, they are looking for certain things, but they don't really care how it comes across. So maybe they're not worried. So a lot of law is writing and reading, and maybe they're not worried about that because you got excellent grades in English classes. But maybe you're a chemical engineering major, so they want to make sure your personal statement shows that you can write well. So you're trying to think about how can all these components of my application show that I am a good candidate for law school, and whether that's specifically talking to professors about what their letter of recommendation is going to highlight so that it's not duplicative of other letters of recommendation, and maybe that's having a personal statement that talks about one aspect of your identity or your passion for law, and a diversity statement or a different addendum that talks about something else. You want to be able to portray as much as yourself beyond those two numbers to admissions as possible, so that they see you as a compelling applicant and not just as two numbers.
I think also in the same vein, if you are looking at a school which is you're not in if you're not in the range, either in your LSAT or your GPA or both, the optional essays that are available could also be very helpful to you. I wrote one for one of my reach schools about the dining room table that I grew up eating at. And I was really not in the range of this school at all. But it did get me on the wait list. And then I do think it helped give them a much fuller picture of who I was, which helped them, it's harder to say no to a person than it is to say no to statistics. So I would really make them see you as a person. Additionally, I think you should be very cognizant of what your background in terms of like work experience or internships is like. Like Katie said, I am a public interest scholar. I have a lot of public interest backgrounds. I knew that was going to be something that was very important and something that I wanted to do. So a lot of my personal statement was geared towards my experiences in public service, which helped me get into the program at Villanova.
Good points. We have a couple questions about the LSAT. Do you all have an effective time that worked for you in applying for law school for the fall after your graduating year, and how did you study for it?
Yeah, I remember taking my LSAT. I only took it once. I took it June after my junior year of college, and I studied approximately from winter break and then to obviously late May, early June. And I kind of like, it was kind of an interval of race for me. I studied a little bit as the weeks and days went on. I increased my workload, and obviously during the whole month of May to like half June, I really was doing it all day long. And just really, what's really important about the LSAT, I think, is actually taking practice tests are your biggest key to success. I think you'll find that applicable in law school as well, that, you know, just reading a book of information is not active studying and learning. Rather, by learning from your mistakes and learning how different questions, logic games, things of that nature are, how to analyze them is what really lets you succeed. Because unlike your undergraduate exams where you're kind of like learning to memorize certain material and regurgitate it, you have to learn how to think critically and apply it to a new fact pattern. So, you know, I used tools that were free because I was not the richest college student, and I used tools that were available on campus. I remember the LSAC had a free modules for students to use, and I relied on that. So just being resourceful during your study process and making it fit for you and you only is what I would recommend.
I will also say that UPAC is anticipating giving out free LSAT books the week before Thanksgiving. I will still remember Daniel coming to our office and taking a box on a bike and taking them to the LSAT prep course he was teaching. So we finally got rid of them last week. So if anyone's in the audience that came and got one, thank you. But there will be others coming in November from UPAC. So anyone else, advice from?
Are you gonna go? Okay, go ahead, Tim.
I have a lot of advice about the LSAT, but I think big picture is that if you've taken a standardized test before, which you probably have, and especially if that standardized test was the SAT, because that's just shown to be more correlative with the LSAT than the ACT, you're not reinventing the wheel here. So if you liked how you studied for the SAT and you liked how you did on the SAT, rinse and repeat. If you like how you studied but didn't like how you did, or you didn't like how you studied but you like how you did, like think about that and think about how you're going to replicate and change and tweak and perfect that process for this again. And I think that in law school, you should do that again. Like, you've got school before, you're not reinventing the wheel. And I will also say that I think when you want to study and how you want to study, I kind of just said, but when you want to study, I think you should take a diagnostic test. There's free ones on Khan Academy. You do it, you see your score, and then you get an idea of where you want that score to be. Because studying to try and get a 6-point increase versus studying to try and get a 15-point increase is going to look very different, and is going to have widely different amounts of time, widely different amount of expenses and stuff like that. So I think the more knowledge you can get up front to try and plan, the better. And whether that's through analyzing what you did in past standardized tests and then taking a diagnostic to know how long you need and what you want to get is going to be the most helpful. And I'm a huge fan of PowerScore. It is quite expensive. There are some resources at Penn State that have helped pay for it. But I think that's just what I used, and that's what I'm going to plug.
Do you, Jane, you mentioned, I'm sorry, Genevievre, go ahead.
Okay, sorry. So this summer before my senior year, I thought I was going to take a gap year until one day I woke up and I said I'm going to law school. And the next day a bunch of stuff happened, but then that day I said I'm going to law school. And then the next day I decided to self-study, and self-studying was just not for me. I found it to be very difficult to just read a book to myself. And so I did take a class. So I took a Princeton class. I do not recommend Princeton Review. I didn't find it to be helpful, but I did take the November LSAT and I did well, but not what I wanted, which then pushed back my whole timeline, which is why you should apply early, because then I had to wait until January to take the next test. So then that's when I self-studied with Manhattan Prep. So Princeton did help me because it taught me like the basics, which allowed me to self-study. And then I did the Manhattan Prep books, which I highly, highly, highly recommend. I did a lot better in a very short amount of time, which then allowed me to apply. But what I did when I was studying during the fall, when I was in classes, was that I did all of my homework on the weekends, like everything for the whole week. And so I just had to show up to class every day. And then I also was involved in a lot of like extracurricular activities, so I could also focus my time on that during the week. And then whenever I wasn't in class, I was studying. So I was in the library until like 2-3 o'clock in the morning for like many, many months. And so I recommend like just getting your schoolwork done, like your life that's happening right now, done on the weekends, because you have a lot of time, and then you can spend the weeks studying. And then every 2 weeks I did a practice test, which I also recommend, like using the LSAC, which has free tests. But I'm also somebody that remembers the answers, and after doing it a number of times, they don't give you new tests. So that made me have to like buy books specifically with tests, because I'm just like, I just remember it, and then I'm like, oh, I don't know it, I just remember the answer. So also know that, and like those kind of resources, they don't give you new questions. So yeah.
For a timeline, would you all suggest trying to take the LSAT in June before your senior year, or ideally? Okay. And the studying, James, you mentioned you had done that from winter break on. So that also seems ideal to maybe use the winter break and spring break, and as well as time during the year to study before that June timeframe, and then buckle down in May maybe and and get more in. But obviously there's some wiggle room then coming into the fall with your applications. Okay. Someone had specifically asked about improving reading comprehension score with the LSAT. Does anyone have a resource for that, or would you suggest what you've already suggested as resources?
That's the toughest one to improve. It's a great question. If you're solely focused on that section, if you've already brought the other ones up to where you want to be, then I would just peruse through a few different books and see which one might have a reading comprehension strategy that is really clicking with you. But I think that's definitely the toughest one to kind of improve upon during the studying process.
I'm so sorry.
Go ahead.
I would also say that I think a lot of the issues with reading comprehension and why it's so hard to bring up is just the sheer like mental exhaustion that accompanies that section. You're reading very quickly, trying to retain a lot of information and answer the questions. So you might want to start by just extending the amount of stories that you read, even if it's not in timed conditions necessarily, but like just reading. I think you get 4 stories if I remember, or 4 readings if I remember correctly on the test. Maybe you start reading 6 and realizing how good you do that, and just kind of extending your mental stamina to be able to last long enough for those stories. I recommended that to a couple people and they found it very helpful. So if that's how you learn best, then that's how I would recommend it. Additionally, kind of going back to the last question, just super quickly, I started studying before I think I was ready to take it seriously. And I would really recommend not doing that, because then you just waste time. Really like start to, if you are not ready to start studying and like make it a serious part of your life, then I think it's better to like be very concentrated than it is to kind of lackadaisically study and like not take it seriously for a couple of months and then realize that you just wasted that time, in my experience.
Great, thank you. I'm going to ask one more question on the undergrad perspective, and then let's get into law school and what's behind the scenes. Do you all have any, we mentioned some of the things you've been involved with now in law school as well as in undergrad. Do you have any suggestions for students and what they could be engaging with while at Penn State to kind of prep them for law school, whether that's the rigors of the academics or just the topic of law, to be thinking about as an undergrad?
I have a sort of radical answer of you should do things that you like, whether or not they are related to law, because you might have your whole life to do law related stuff. And if you love that, it's going to be a great life. But you're not a monolith, you have other interests, and you can view law, you can view college as a stepping stone to law school. And I am guilty of doing that to some degree, but you should also view college as a time where you can have fun for fun's sake, and you can explore other interests. I have this weird interest in linguistics that I explored in college that really is not going to be a part of my life, but I love that I explored it in college. And so along with like the chat question, it's never too early to start planning out your path to law school. I took my first LSAT diagnostic freshman year. Like, I'm guilty of being a very neurotic person when it came to that. But also, it is sometimes too late to have fun and to get a college experience that you're going to look back at no matter what law school you go to, or if you don't go to law school, and say, hey, I loved that I pushed back this practice test that I wanted to take so that I could like go to this cool event with friends that I won't be able to go to after I leave Penn State, and do other things. So there are so many different types of people in law school. There are people like me that were English majors, that's kind of a dime a dozen, like political science, like very law focused background. There are people here that were chemistry majors and didn't do anything with law. There are people here that were econ, mechanical engineering, all types. Do what's going to make you happy. And then if law school is going to, well, law school itself might not make it happy. I actually love law school. Most people do not. But if being in the law is going to make you happy, then go to law school and do that.
I love that answer, Daniel. And I would challenge the students in the audience to Google Daniel Zahn student profiles with the College of Liberal Arts and see all the awesome things he did while he was here. So there are quite a few. So that's a great answer. Anyone else want to build off of that, undergrad?
Oh,
yeah.
I would just say that I came in thinking I was going to go to med school. And it was mainly because I watched a lot of Grey's Anatomy, and I realized that it's not the same. But I realized I wanted to go to law school through meeting people through clubs. And so I just challenge you to just gain different experiences, like Daniel said, and you might realize you really want to go to law school, or you might realize that you met someone that had this completely different career that you didn't even know about, and that also then changed your mind, and then you want to do that. So I think it's great to be focused, but don't keep your head so focused on the game that you don't even see everything around you, because this is like the only time in your life where you can try different things and have no consequences. So I would encourage you, if you still want to do law school, that's great, but also see your other options before you're like locked down as a freshman. Yeah.
I mentioned this to the panelists when we first started. As a career coach in liberal arts, I meet with a lot of students who are interested in law school. Some are very definite about that decision, even in a young stage in higher education, while others are still kind of on the fence about it. Is there a moment where you know, and this is the next step for me, and what would you say was that number one reason why you decided law school was the number one step, or the next step for you after graduation? Daniel, you mentioned career. Your focus in career was defined by going to law school, but anyone else want to share that advice? We know that it's a financial investment, a personal investment, obviously a mental investment to go on to law school. So knowing for sure is a great thing to know. I'm wondering if you have any advice to make that decision.
I worked at it's called a family law facilitator's office. They represent pro per litigants, so they're self-represented litigants, and we help them file paperwork and things like that. That kind of helped me steer myself towards law school. And then I was very sure when I interned at the California Innocence Project in San Diego. That was a very radicalizing experience and really affirmed to me that this is exactly what I wanted to do with my life. So I would recommend getting internship experience and learning from people who do the job that you think you might be interested in. I also know a lot of people who thought they were interested in immigration law or big corporate law, and they got internships in those fields and saw what those lawyers did all day, every day, and realized that was not for them. But it still looks good on your application. It's still a talking point. It's still valuable work experience that law schools like. So really, if you're interested in this career, test it out for a summer and see if you like it and if it's something that you want to do for the rest of your life.
Building off of that, I knew I wanted to go to law school before I got to undergrad, because we had a speaker come to my high school, and not to sound cliche, but it was quite transformative. So I was knew it, gonna be a lawyer. That's what I want to do. So undergrad was sort of just a filler space. And so I had that opportunity to try out different things. But even then, I had friends senior year who maybe did have an externship or took a class that was a bit more liberal arts focused. So maybe it was a poli-sci or criminology or something along those lines, that they were oh, this is fascinating, and would totally pivot. So I don't think there's any one way that people come to the realization that they want to do law. I don't want to say that you kind of fall into it and it's just this moment of, aha, law school, that's the thing I'm going to do. But I do think it's really great, like Alannah said, to get experience, to ask people. I know that I have family friends who are attorneys. So I talk to them about it, being what is it really like? What do you do? What do you love about it? And then I even have friends in law school who are yeah, I really want to be here and I really want to be a lawyer, but I'm still not exactly sure if a classic lawyer is what I'm going to be. So even when you do get there, it's okay to not exactly know what you're going to do with your law degree. So I just always say do what's best for you and sort of follow your intuition and your heart, and you will kind of come to that decision that's best for you, whether it's a yes or a no.
Great, thank you both. Oh, thank you all. Okay, so great questions coming in. 20 minutes left, so let's do this. So let's talk a little bit about, and I'm not skipping over anyone, I'm doing my best here, but let's talk about what a typical day in law school looks like, and how students, just a little insight in the light. So maybe Alannah at the L1, James, you're on your way out, L3, and then everyone else is L2. So if you want to give a little day in the life of law school, that would be great. We'll start with you, Alannah.
Yeah, I am really trying to keep law school a 9 to 5, which is what everybody tells you. Some days it really works, some days it really doesn't. My typical day though, I get to school by, oh, and just a disclaimer, law school is a little different because at least for Villanova, it's all in one building. So when I say that I'm in a building all day, I'm in one building all day. I don't go anywhere. My steps at the end of the day are 3,000. It's very depressing. But I get to school at about 8:30, anywhere between 8:30 and 9 o'clock. I study before class. I have class well, it depends how long, but anyway, I have class. When I get out of class, I go back to the library and I do whatever readings that I still need to do. I give myself 30 minutes to 45 minutes for lunch. I go back to class. My last class ends typically about 2:45. I go back to the library until 5:30, 6 o'clock. I go home, maybe go for a run, cook dinner, but I'm really trying to keep it to a 9 to 5. And again, some days it works, some days I'm at the library until 9 p.m. It really just depends.
All right.
Yeah.
James, you want to slip to L3?
Yeah, so since it's my last year of law school, it's a little bit different. There's a saying that in the legal community that goes, 1L, they scare you to death, 2L, they work you to death, and 3L, they bore you to death. So right now I'm kind of in that little phase of being like, all right, can I graduate yet and take the bar? But typically, my days are pretty simple. I go to the courthouse on Tuesday and Thursdays for all day. And then I take my 2 classes Mondays and Wednesdays for an hour 15 each. And then I have my law review credits and kind of just sitting here waiting. But to everyone's point, the first year of law school is really the toughest, because particularly coming out straight out of undergrad, it is truly a full-time job where you need to put a lot of effort in just to get through 40 pages of reading for one class. And it's not like reading that's kind of like, you can kind of skim through it. It's more so you got to like dissect the reasoning and what was the holding on, and what counter arguments should have been made possibly that didn't, and how does this fit into the course syllabus, and so on and so on. But I sit here telling you all that I have a deep appreciation for where I am now, because it was not always this easy this 3L year. But that's just, I hope I can offer a glimmer of light at the end of the tunnel for everyone else.
So I go to Northeastern, and we have untraditional sort of format of how our school works. So right now we have this thing called the co-op program, which means that we only do 1 semester of classes, and then your second semester you do a co-op, which is like an internship, and then you go like back and forth until you graduate. So like your first year is the only time you're ever in class the whole year. So right now in the fall, I'm on my co-op, which means that I get a grade pretty much for interning. So I'm full-time intern at the Harvard Immigration and Refugee Clinic, which I'm working on immigration law, which is an interest of mine, which is also why I chose Northeastern, because I had a broad idea of what I wanted to do. But what I like about the program is that you get 3 different tries to try different things. So I was in classes this summer. And so I took 6 classes, which is about 16 credits. And that was pretty much like a 9 to 5, where you go to class, you read, you go home, do the same thing. But what's different about your second year, if you choose to, is that you go through this process called on-campus interviewing, which happens the summer before your second year, technically, but since Northeastern is like weird. So that was definitely difficult to juggle. One being like this summer was the first time I was ever in classes during the summer. I've never taken summer classes my whole like academic career, and also having to like balance that was difficult. But now only being on an internship, and like once it's 5 o'clock, you don't have homework, you can just go home and sleep, is a lovely thing. So I definitely recommend looking at the program. It's a really good program if you don't know what you want to do.
Daniel, Peyton, anything on the L2?
Yeah, I mean, at least how it works at Stanford Law is that the 2Ls are the people who are running all of the clubs and organizations. And that's a bit stressful. I've also found out that I chronically overcommit, and also I will say yes to any social engagement if it means that I'm doing that instead of doing my readings. So I have a very different schedule than I had in undergrad, because on good days, which is normally like 4 days out of the week I can muster it, I will like wake up at 5 a.m. and read for 4 hours. Because after class, I just want to do anything but read. So my day is very front loaded. I've become an odd morning person that I will like wake up, read for 4 hours, go to class that usually starts around like 9:40, and then either go to like a lunch thing, go to more class, and then do like other stuff. I got very big into tennis last year in law school because it was a nice social distanced way. So I'll try and play a lot of tennis and do other things completely unrelated to law school that reinstill a sense of humanity and independent identity beyond law student.
And I guess just to close it out, I like Alannah said, I treat it like a 9 to 5, but I also think it's important to like recognize like how best like your success is made. So I too have become sort of more of a morning person like Daniel. Like I get up early, I'm more productive in the morning. I go to class, I stay in the library until like 5, 6, 7 at night. And then I come back to my apartment and I try not to do any work. Like I try to keep it totally separate. You know, school work is in the law building. My apartment is chill. If I need to recap, retype something and things like that, that's what I do. But I think like I have friends who for the life of them can't get up before like 9 a.m. and then they're up until like 1, 2 in the morning. But then, you know, it's compensated because, you know, they don't get up as early and like they do their work later in the day. And it's just sort of recognizing what I think law school taught me the most is like focus on how you best study, you best perform, you know, how you balance your schedule. Because sometimes when I tried something a little bit different, like my first year and it just didn't work out. So I sort of checked myself and like went back to like how I best perform. And I think that's how you need to approach it and just keep yourself going. Cause it is like a marathon and you just need to do it bit by bit, but it's totally worth it.
Thank you all for going through your experience. And thank you to our panelists who are typing in answers to questions we just haven't gotten to yet. So please check out the chat, and there are some ideas on classes some people have taken while undergrad to help through the process. We talked about this a little bit. Did you all know what you wanted to concentrate on in law school before you came in, or do you have some advice in thinking open-mindedly when you start law school? Alannah, you were more specific, right?
Yeah, I definitely knew I am going to be a public defender and then eventually transition into post-conviction work. So that was very much my concern, which is why I went more criminology for my undergrad degree, and then political science I just managed to pick up along the way. So I was very focused on what I wanted to do, but it's totally normal to not know exactly what kind of law you want to do or even to change your mind in the middle. I was really wavering the past couple of weeks, and then my crim professor, actually just brought in a judge to come speak with us who works in criminal law in the district courts, and listening to her speak about her day and the things that she does like was very reinvigorating for me and really reaffirmed that's what I wanted. But I have a friend who came in with the idea of immigration law. That was something she was really interested in, and now she's wavering on it. And so we have like panels that she's going to try, which we have to do as a part of professional development in order to try out other areas of law and see what piques her interest. So it's good to be geared and know what you want to do, but it's also okay to not know and or to change your mind in the process.
I will just quickly add that I knew like since 6th grade the type of law I wanted to do, but in law school, there's, at least at no law school I've ever heard of, like there's no concentrations. Usually after the first year, there's very little requirements that, like I've taken almost all of the First Amendment classes. Like there really aren't that many. It's one amendment that like you do have the opportunity to explore and do other things, even if the only thing you want to do is crim defense or the only thing you want to do is environmental law. You never know when a case about environmental law is going to rely on like Fourth Amendment questions. So you really, it's like one whole law and you're really able to explore it, even if maybe you don't want to.
One of the questions that Daniel and Alannah were answering in the chat was, were there any specific classes at Penn State that helped prepare you for law school that you would suggest? So I just wanted to throw that out to the rest of the panelists if they had any suggestions on courses that were helpful to them in preparing for law school and or deciding on law school. Genevievre, James?
Yeah. I don't know if it necessarily correlates to law school, but any AFAM class I found was really helpful, and just the way I thought about the law. You're going to read a lot of cases where, you know, it was decided with maybe not everyone in mind. And so I think like the knowledge I learned in those classes allowed me to like, well, what about this group? What about that group? So it didn't really like directly correlate to law school, but I think like taking classes to understand different identities helps you think about the law in a different way.
Great point.
And then just to add on, oh, sorry. Just to add on to it, I think this is what they had mentioned in the chat was like focusing, or at least making sure you incorporate some classes that have heavy components of reading and writing and critical thinking. Surprisingly, I was an economics major, and that's in the College of Liberal Arts. So we actually would do a fair amount of reading in some of our upper level courses. But I think that's just the fact that it was in liberal arts, but I had a history minor. So that was where my reading, my writing, all the papers and the critical thinking and the conversation skills came into play. I'm not saying that you have to like specifically take classes because it's like, oh my gosh, I don't write a paper in this class, or I'm not reading, you know, 10, 20, 30 pages in a night for this class. But I think just focusing on that, because as we mentioned many times, like law school is going to be reading and writing and researching. So just honing those skills a little bit early, and then just being able to understand like how you best approach those kinds of challenges, I think is really beneficial.
Great advice. I've got one question hanging out. And Daniel, I'm not sure if you answered or not, but do law schools look more at GPAs or LSAT scores when accepting applicants? I think we talked a little bit about that. If anyone wants to shoot out an answer. About the same.
Yeah, I was going to quickly type it out in case you didn't got to it, but it really depends. No one really knows. You can look at where your GPA and your LSAT are and what their medians are, and you might be a splitter, which means like, hey, I have a below 25th percent GPA, but above 75th percent LSAT. And maybe they really like you and they need someone to pull up their LSAT median. So then they take you. But maybe they really like you, but right now their LSAT median is doing really well and they need someone to pull up their GPA median, so they're not going to be able to take you. You really don't know. So like, short answer, if it's your dream school, shoot your shot. And the best spot you can be in is above the 75th percentile of both, but that's like a pipe dream for most people.
Not always a warm and fuzzy process for sure. Well, thank you all so much. And I'd love to end tonight on, if any of you have final words or advice. As students, as you can tell, we've got first year students, sophomores, juniors, and seniors here right now, listening to your wonderful advice, and as inspired as I am by you, I'm sure they are too, for what you've accomplished outside of Penn State. So any last parting words of advice, or wish I woulda, or make sure you do this because I'm missing it, you want to share with our students? Did I cut out?
Yeah.
You're a little bit, but you're back. You're not back.
I can hit on this, Katie, but
thank you so much, James. Thanks for saving me.
I think what I would recommend for everyone, just to really enjoy the time you have at Penn State. Like, you know, there's nothing like it right now. I mean, I met my now fiance at Penn State, and we are both in law school and doing the whole law school thing, but there's nothing quite like having a solid college experience, because once you get to law school or out of college, you understand that, you know, it's a real world out there of consequences and responsibilities and things like that. And I think what makes lawyers more complete and more relatable to ultimately their clients, which is the whole point of why we want to be lawyers, is be able to relate and have personable connections. You know, those kind of like attachments that, you know, you can only make when you understand people's backgrounds and where they come from. So yes, your GPA and your LSAT score are very important, but I also think that, you know, having sort of like a fulfilling college background is necessary as well.
I would say don't impulse go to law school because you don't know what else you want to do. You may get into like your dream school, and that's great, but say you don't get any financial aid. And that then narrows like the reason why you went to law school. You may have to then choose a different career path that you may not enjoy because you have to like pay off loans or things like that. And I know many people in law school that have done that because they just had to go somewhere because they didn't have a job yet, or they needed to go to law school because that's what they wanted to do since they were 5 years old, which is great. Go to law school, but make sure that it's the smartest financial decision for you, and make sure that it's actually something that you really, really want to do, because it's very difficult. It's 3 years. You feel every single day. And if you don't want to do it, or if you have other financial pressures that forces you to go to big law and you really want to do public interest work, or you go to a school that only provides public interest opportunities, but you really want to do big law, but you just need to go to law school, it's not beneficial to you in the long run. So really think about it. And even if you don't get into that law school, or even if you get into law school, but it's not the best choice, it's okay. And you can just try again the next time.
Kind of in the same vein, I would also say, like, as James said, like 1 year, they scare you to death. So I'm right in that. Take my advice, I guess, with a grain of salt, because I'm like right in the thick of it. Law school really, like, especially your 1 year, like, can really be a little, it's very hard. It can be demoralizing. It really takes a lot out of you. So really make sure when you go to law school, you know why you're going. Like really, really, really think about why and pick your why. And you're going to have to choose to like remember it and abide by that why when you have your memo and your midterm and 6 different meetings with different professors. Like when things get really crazy, you have to remember why you're doing this in the first place, because things will get really crazy and you might not like it in that moment. So really try to remember why you're here if you choose to come.
And just to build off that, like I've been saying, is like focus on like what works best for you. Like I'm always someone who worries about like what other people are doing, what other people are thinking. Like, am I doing the best I can? Am I putting in the most effort? Like, I think, especially in law school, like remembering to take a breath. You are more than capable of what is being asked of you. Take time for yourself, like get involved in those clubs, have fun, like make friends, meet your friends, hang out with your friends, like find that good balance, because it is 3 years, it is a professional school, and you are working towards this amazing, successful career you're going to have. But don't remember to take a step back and to enjoy being in law school. Like I like school, I'll say it, I've always liked school. So enjoy where you are as well, because you are going to get out in 3 years after law school, and then you are going to have this job, and it's going to be, work and life and everything else. So just enjoy it. And then also realize that you can do it even when you are, challenged with many different things, and you'll just be enjoying it and you'll be fine, and just go with it.
I think my closing piece of advice is like one of the only things I felt I messed up when I was at Penn State. I mean, obviously, as James said, you should enjoy it, but I would like go to these things. I would go to other talks with alumni or cool professors. And at the end, I felt like they would always say, like, reach out if you had questions. And I never really had any questions, so I would never really reach out. But I felt like you had to come with this like preset agenda, and you had to make it a really productive meeting. And being on the other side of it, I mean, if I get to talk to like a Penn Stater who's interested in law school, that seems like a super valid reason not to do my reading. And I love that. So even if you have no questions, if you just want to talk, if you're not exactly sure what you want to talk about, in my experience, almost anyone at Penn State and almost any alumni, sorry, I'm like thinking about the pluralization of it. But almost anyone would love to speak with you, even if it's just a super casual conversation. So I think that I should have reached out to more people as an undergrad.